Time no longer. Chapter 3, Part B, 7 Churches. The Church of Pergamus was encompassing the period after Constantine, during which the Roman Church worked feverishly to take control of Europe, not only on a religious front, but on the grand political scale as well. The Roman hierarchy realized that to achieve this goal they needed to gain control from the ground level on up. Not only did they establish a doctrine with the origins at the Council of Nicaea in AD 325, in addition they expanded their influence in the areas of education, social issues, and civic affairs. The Jews of the time worshipped on the Sabbath day or Saturday. This practice had gone on for century after century. The Roman Church, possibly wishing to separate its image from the crucifiers of Jesus Christ, and most certainly to exhibit authority, chose Sunday as their day of worship. The Lord's Day was also designated as the day to celebrate Easter. In Acts 7:59, Stephen, a staunch follower of Jesus in the early Christian church, became the first martyr in the cause of Jesus. Stephen was a man of great faith and worked many miracles in the process of winning many to the Christian faith. In defense of his faith, he delivered one of history's great orations in front of the Jewish council. False witnesses were brought in to discredit him. Despite his unparalleled oratory and angelic countenance, he was convicted of blasphemy, taken out and stoned. Many of Stephen's contemporary disciples were treated similarly. Some of his contemporaries are named in Acts 6:5. Among them are Philip and Nicholas, a proselyte and a resident of Antioch. The Roman Church, as part of its plan to establish itself and eliminate all the pagan customs, discovered a foundation or background to build on. There were a few Christian holidays as designated previously, but this might not be enough to keep the common man's attention focused on Christ and the Church. It was deemed necessary by the church leaders to create a legacy or tradition to build on. They became so concerned about maintaining their hold on the masses with its resultant monetary gain and power that they took it upon themselves to create their own traditions apart from God. They changed the day of worship, thus they set themselves above God. This unfortunate step led to various other practices being presented to the people as being from God, and when in fact they were devised by the priests and rulers of the day. Martyrs such as Stephen had feast days named after them in commemoration of their giving their lives for what they believed. One very famous saint was Nicholas, the bishop of Myra in Lycia. He was tortured and imprisoned during the 10-year reign of terror administered by the Emperor Diocletian. He was also purported to be at the Council of Nicaea in AD 325. This celebration of the feast of St. Nicholas has evolved into the modern-day celebration of Santa Claus during Christmas time. Therefore, the pattern was set to consider humans who suffered or experienced trials or tragedy as saints. The practice of honoring these saints flourished in the early Christian church. As this practice evolved, the saints were not only honored, but came to be revered, and were even considered holy. Churches were built to honor them and the objects representing them or things they owned by them. This evolved further into the practice of actually worshiping the saints and their relics. People actually began to believe these inanimate objects could work miracles for them. They would pray to these saints instead of God in times of trouble or stress. On some rare and coincidental occasions, good fortune would come to them, thus solidifying this erroneous belief. This theory was in direct contrast to the law of God. God said that we as humans are to have no other gods before us and not make any graven image of any other god. The Old Testament is filled with stories of people who suffered severe consequences by violating this most basic of laws. Now, in direct defiance of God, the practice continued into the early Christian church, the church that Christ the Lord had authored. Stephen was the first saint, but God chose to describe this practice of worshiping saints with the case of the most famous saint of all. Everyone knows who St. Nicholas is. In not one but two instances, God indicates his distaste for this doctrine of the Nicolaitans. Both in the church of Ephesus and in the church of Pergamos, God expresses his hatred for this practice of saint worship. Continuing on this same theme, the day of worship was changed from Jewish Saturday to the day of pagan sun god Sunday. Sunday was also the day of Christ's resurrection. Constantine's edict in AD 321 is the first instance of recorded law, civil or ecclesiastical, that requires rest on the venerable day of the sun. At the Council of Laodicea in AD 364, it was recommended that the church members rest on Sunday. This was the first ecclesiastical law to proclaim Sunday, the Lord's Day, as a day of worship. It's not until nearly 200 years later, at the time of Justinian's decree in AD 538, that there was widespread acceptance and the beginning of enforcement of this law. The papacy was by this time firmly established, and Justinian's decree gave them real political power. Thus ended any effective resistance to papal supremacy in the religious world. Those opposed to the papal doctrines and the laws feared for their lives, and persecution became the order of the day. The Roman Church now begins its religious and political reign of 1260 years. The Church of Thyatira encompasses the Church of God from AD 538 until the time of the Reformation. Martin Luther was a Catholic parish priest from the small Saxon town of Wittenberg, Germany. His pastorship was being undermined, and he took issue with his church. His parishioners were crossing the river into a foreign territory and buying indulgences. These letters of indulgence bore the name of the Pope and forgave the people of not only their sins, but also released their dead relatives from purgatory. This, among other things, incensed Luther and prompted him to act. On Halloween, October 31, 1517, the Augustinian monk and university professor Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the great wooden door of the All Saints Church in Wittenberg. Luther's original intent was to reform his church, but 1,000 years of tradition could not be changed. Thus his great act of faith led to the Great Reformation. This is not only a reformation of peace, but of rhetoric. Unfortunately, this was also a reformation of violence and bloodshed. And I will kill her children with death, and all the churches shall know that I am he which searcheth the reins and hearts, and I will give unto every one of you according to your works. Revelation 2:23. Zwingli and Calvin, among others, championed reform throughout Europe and beyond. The Reformation culminated in the 30 Years' War, which broke out in 1618. Fighting erupted all over Europe, finally ending when the Bavarian King Ferdinand III signed the Peace of Westphalia on October 24, 1648. Thus the Church of Sardis covers the period from the beginning of the Reformation in 1517 until the Pope is taken captive by Napoleon's general Berthier in 1798. The Church of Sardis went about killing her children, but the Spirit of God continued to work overtime. Because of God's Spirit, we now begin to see the fruits of the Spirit in God's church. There were some in this church who were found undefiled and were clothed in white raiment. These undefiled would join the saints already in heaven and walk with their Creator for eternity. Their names were placed in the book of life, never to be erased.